You may be wondering if your plant needs to be repotted, what the signs are. Maybe your plant has yellowing leaves, it's not putting out new growth, the roots are coming out the bottom. These are all signs that your plant needs to be repotted. So in this Houseplant Care 101 episode, I'm going to share the top 5 signs that your plant will be showing that it needs to be repotted. And then at the end, I'm going to share some tips on repotting your plants. And just know, whether you're new to the plant game or you've been in it for a long time, we all have plants that are showing signs that they need to be repotted. So this is a no judgment zone, and I'm really excited to go through these tips and tricks with all of you on repotting. This Houseplant Care 101 series is sponsored by Repotme.com. With Repotme, you can have all of your houseplant supplies delivered right to your door. They are a one-stop shop for all of your houseplant, orchid, or succulent needs. They have custom handmade houseplant soils ranging from tropical houseplants, cactus and succulents, pothos, snake plants, and more. I cannot live without their clear slotted orchid pots. They have amazing houseplant fertilizers and so much more. I've included their link in my description below, and you can get 10% off any soil with my code Ashley. The first sign that your plant needs to be repotted are roots growing out of the bottom of the drainage hole. Now, this is a pretty extreme example. They can also be coming out the top of the pot, and this just means that the pot has run out of room. You might want to actually pull your plant out of the pot, because depending on how many drainage holes there are, maybe the roots aren't going to come out of there. Like this one has so many drainage holes that it's easy for the roots to come out. So you may end up thinking that your plant doesn't need to be repotted, but then once you pull it out of the pot, you can actually see that the roots are in fact very, very compact. When a plant becomes root bound like this one is, it struggles to take up water and nutrients because the roots are too compacted. This can lead to dehydration, nutrient deficiencies, and stunted growth. Plus, tangled roots can eventually strangle themselves, making it harder for the plant to thrive. Now, when you're shopping for a houseplant, I always recommend checking out the roots of the plant. First of all, just to make sure the plant's healthy and you don't see any root rot or issues going on with the roots, because the roots are really like the most important part of the plant. Everything counts on the roots. The other reason why is to check and see if it's root bound already, because if there's not much room in the pot at the nursery, you can count on having to repot that plant pretty quickly upon bringing it home. But if you pull it out and you see that there's room in there, then you won't have to repot that plant. So the next sign that your plant needs to be repotted is actually the opposite to a compacted root system. And that's where, when you have a plant that has a small root ball is in a pot that is way too big for the size of that root ball. And why that's important and what you want to avoid that is that the plant is going to be sitting in all of that excess soil, especially after we water it, and the soil is going to have absorbed all that moisture, and those little baby roots are not going to be able to absorb all that moisture, so it's just going to be sitting there in that, and it's probably going to get root rot. I see that all the time where people bring a plant home and they're like, oh, well, I have this pot on hand or this nursery pot on hand, or I really like the way that pot looks, and so they'll repot their little baby plant, and if you take this out, you can see that it has excess soil already, because it has a very, very fragile tiny root system. Like, you can barely even see the roots on there. And people will get, like, even succulents, that kind of thing. They'll stick it into a pot like this, put soil all around it, and then in a few weeks to a month, they wonder why their plant died from root rot. So just keep that in mind. And when you're at the plant shop, actually shopping for plants, maybe take a look at the root system, and don't only look for if it's too compacted, but check it out to see if it has way too much soil for the size of the root ball, because if that's the case, you will want to repot that plant in an appropriate size pot that you've downsized from the one that they have at the nursery. When you're repotting, you don't want to necessarily always go 1 to 2 sizes bigger than the nursery pot. You want to go 1 to 2 inches larger than the root ball of the plant, and that's going to give you a way more accurate reading on what size pot you need. Like, this is way bigger than the nursery pot, but even more like of an inaccurate size pot when you take the root ball into consideration. The right size pot, whether you're sizing 1 to 2 sizes up or even if you're sizing down, and the right kind of soil will really be a great recipe to make sure that your plant thrives. So the next sign that your plant needs to be repotted, signs of stunted growth. Maybe your plant is growing and it's during the growing season, but the new leaves that are coming out are really, really tiny. And especially if your plant is getting a decent amount of light and fertilizer and you're doing all the things cuttings, but it's still putting out small leaves, chances are that your plant really does need to be repotted. Maybe it's not putting out any new growth at all, and you're wondering, why on earth is my plant not, putting out new growth? It's the growing season. I've done all the things. I've had it for a couple of years. Maybe you need to repot that plant, whether you size up or size down, depending on what we talked about on the last two. Another sign that repotting might be needed is if your plant has yellowing or drooping leaves despite proper care. It's getting the right amount of light, it's getting the right amount of water, right amount of fertilizing, but it's still just drooping, having yellow leaves. This could be a sign of compacted roots, where the plant isn't able to absorb enough water because honestly there's not enough soil in there to like retain the right amount of moisture, or the soils become hydrophobic, which I'll talk about, or there's way too much soil in the pot for the plant and it can't handle all of that moisture in the pot. So that's another sign that it'll need to be repotted, and that'll just help it be able to absorb the right amount of water, the right amount of nutrients, and make the plant as happy as it can be. So before I jump into some repotting tips to keep in mind, the fifth sign that your plant needs to be repotted is the soil itself isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, in that maybe the water just drains through so fast, or the soil itself isn't retaining any moisture. Maybe the soil's become mushy or too compact or like weird and crumbly, because it's true that the soil over time will lose its ability to retain moisture, retain nutrients, and these plants, unlike in the wild, they don't have access to anything outside of what they get in their pot. So if they're really struggling to get moisture and nutrients because of the low quality of the soil, then that's going to be a huge problem for them, because they're not able to venture out elsewhere to get those things that they need. So this is really, really common. A lot of times if you have soil that's super, super compact, people will use like chopsticks or a knife or something to try to loosen it up. Even if your plant hasn't outgrown its pot, it will still need to be repotted at least once every 2 years. For most tropical plants, that seems to be a really fair amount of time. Now the nice thing is that you won't need to repot again for 1 to 2 years once you've done it, and using the correct kind of soil and the correct kind of pot can make all of the difference. Our natural inclination, I think, is to want to like reuse soil, to not have to repot if it's in the correct size pot, but the soil's being a little bit weird, it's not retaining moisture anymore, which means it's not going to be able to retain nutrients anymore. And I would definitely suggest just like biting the bullet, getting the right kind of soil, and just really freshening up that soil, because even if you don't change your pot size but you just refresh the soil, your plant is going to be so happy. So once you have discovered the signs that your plant needs to be repotted, here are the steps that you want to take, and I'm going to share high level what to do to repot your plant. And if you want more detail, I have so many amazing Houseplant Care 101 episodes sharing for all different types of plants. So the first thing you want to do is just gently remove your plant from its pot, maybe loosen the roots a little bit, try to get rid of some of the excess soil. I would recommend watering your plant a few days before you repot. This way the roots will be nice and hydrated, and you have less of a chance of breaking those roots. And some people will really get rough with the roots and kind of get rid of all soil. I don't do this unless I notice there's some sort of pest infestation, because I want that plant to not have to spend a lot of energy recovering its root system, because I want that plant focusing on foliage growth. So the next step is to choose the correct size pot. This is going to be 1 to 2 inches bigger than the root ball. We're not going off of the nursery pot anymore. We're basing it on the size of the root ball and just going, like I said, 1 to 2 inches bigger than that. And whatever pot you choose, just make sure you're choosing one that has a lot of drainage holes. You can use a nursery pot if you want to switch out different cover pots, and nursery pots are amazing, and it's really nice because you can switch out cover pots and not have to repot that plant except for when it's ready for either a soil refresh in a couple of years or when it's outgrown the pot. Step 3 is to choose a really good quality soil mixture. Now you can easily make your own soil blend, and I have learned over the years that this is actually the most important step, is having the right kind of soil for the type of plant that you have. That's a big statement to make, as like I'm out here on the internet saying this is the most important step when it comes to taking care of your plants, but but I have just learned the hard way through killing so many plants and dealing with root rot and all of these issues that so much of the problems can be avoided if you have the right type of soil. So if you're unsure what type of soil, that's a quick, easy Google. Most of these plants, if they're not cacti and succulents, they're mostly tropical plants that we're bringing into our homes. So most of these tropical plants enjoy a well-draining soil mixture. So a general easy recipe for a well-draining soil blend would be a 50 or 60% potting mix. So potting mix in general that you get from the store is really built to retain a lot of moisture, almost too much moisture. That's why we only want to use 50 or 60% of potting mix. Then we want to mix in other substrates that are going to help that water drain out, or the excess water to drain out, which is what these tropical plants would be used to in their natural habitat. So they would like a lot of airflow around the roots. They don't want to be sitting in water. Examples of substrate to help your soil be more well draining would be things like perlite, pumice, orchid bark, activated charcoal, things like that. Sand if you're making your own cactus and succulent soil blend. It's so worth it. I mean, if you use the right kind of soil, you won't have to repot again for a while anyways, which we've talked about, probably about 2 years, unless it's a super fast growing plant. And you won't have to really worry about that plant and if you're giving it too much water, because the only way to really overwater a plant isn't by giving it too much water. It's by putting it in a soil blend that is not the right amount of drainage and where it's going to retain too much water. So if you're not wanting to make your own custom soil blend, I definitely recommend checking out some other options for custom soil blends specifically for like tropical plants. There's a million out there for aeroids. Now I'm partnered up with Repotme because they are amazing and I'm very, very proud to be partnered with them and share them with all of my plant friends in our community. They do have one specifically for not just tropical plants, but specifically for like philodendron, monstera, snake plants, spider plants, African violets, cacti and succulents, holiday cactus like Easter and tropical cacti. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. So you have your pot size picked out, you have your amazing soil blend, your plant is going to be so happy. I would recommend washing that plant off when you, especially if you've like just brought it home. Make sure you do a little bit of preemptive pest management with either like systemic granules or insecticidal soap. It never hurts to just be preventative, especially if you have a lot of plants. We don't want those pests spreading. If they do, it's not the end of the world with the products I mentioned, but maybe a little bit of pest management's a good idea since you're already going through the process of repotting. Then you just put the plant in with the new soil. I do recommend giving that plant a really good drink. Watering from the top is a good idea upon repotting, because you want to just give that plant some time to settle. Make sure that the waters unanimously run through. That's why I like to use clear nursery pots. I love the ones from Repotme that are clear slotted nursery pots because I can keep an eye on the moisture, I can keep an eye on the soil, an eye on the roots. I always know what's going on. They're easy to pull out of the cover pot that they're in. So if you're looking for a little extra pro tip, clear nursery pots are a win-win across the board. And because you have your amazing soil blend, there's no worries about giving that plant too much water or overwatering it, as long as it's not sitting in water in the cover pot. And then just give your plants a chance to settle in. I do recommend holding off on fertilizing until a few weeks. Maybe give it that plant a month to settle in, kind of get acclimated to its new soil, its new pot, and then at that point fertilize if you want to. Especially during the growing months, you'll want to fertilize between spring and fall, starting at 50% strength, and then depending on how your plant reacts to it, maybe go full strength during the growing months and then taper off in the fall. And most plants don't need to be fertilized in the winter months. So there are the top 5 signs that your plant needs to be repotted, and then high level on how to repot your plant, some tips and tricks. I definitely need to do another video on repotting this monstera Thai constellation because she wants to put out new leaves, but she definitely isn't getting the nutrients or the moisture and all the things that she needs to really, really thrive. So I have all sorts of plant care videos coming up. I have other ones if you're interested in seeing more plant care videos in my Houseplant Care 101 series. Feel free to subscribe if you like planty stuff. I do lots of not only care videos, but like plant shopping videos, educational, cozy, planty content. We'd love for you to join our community. We also have really good community on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful rest of the day and that I get to see you soon. Bye.